Our featured speaker this evening served in the Canadian military for 26 years. He specialized in wireless radio systems, radio warfare, and electronic warfare. He knows what he's talking about, guys. This included an awareness of the dangers of electromagnetic radiation. Jerry is a one-of-a-kind sort of a military and communications background. The reign of the Liberals and Prime Minister Trudeau included a temporary experiment of merging the forces of our Navy, Air, and Army. This provided Jerry with a unique experience of working with combined Army and Navy communications intelligence. It's because of this experience that Jerry is especially qualified to unravel for you some of the mysteries of the smart meters and the meshed grid networks. I ask you to please join me in welcoming Jerry Flynn.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. If I can get set up here. I shouldn't be here. I should be at home in my garage making things out of wood. And I was up until about 22 months ago when my daughter called me. And she said, she knew that I was in radio communications for many years, but everything I did was covered by the Official Secrecy Act, so I couldn't, my family didn't know what I did. I did signals intelligence, electronic warfare, and radio warfare. So she knew I had like a radio background, and she said, "Dad, do you know anything about smart meters?" And I said, "No, I don't." She said, "Would you mind having a look at it? Because I've heard some pretty nasty things." She's married and has 3 children, and so she was concerned. So I did. I had a quick look, and the very first thing I noticed was that the utilities are using a wireless radio. That immediately raised an alarm in my head. I looked further, and I realized, to my horror, that every smart meter has 2 radio transmitters inside, which the utilities don't tell you about. They only speak of 1, but there are actually 2 radio transmitters inside. They're both pulsing microwave, which is the most dangerous thing to humans or any life form. And so that, I mean, I haven't been back in my workshop in 21, 22 months. Seriously, I've been just immersed in this. And the more you dig, the worse it gets. Thank you, Jackie, for my military background, and she's quite correct. Thanks to Pierre Trudeau, I'm a one-of-a-kind. There's nobody else. That's not a boast, by the way. It's a statement of fact. Nobody else has had my background. I spent 26 years plus 1 day, almost 16 years, I guess, in the Navy. I was selected for officer. I came up through the ranks. I was selected for officer training, went out to Esquimalt to like a year-long prep school course. And when I graduated, by that time, we'd become a unified force. And so instead of a proud Navy uniform, I found myself in a jolly green jumper, and I'm called a Canadian Armed Forces officer. Which, I mean, it turned out really well insofar as it further diversified my background. Can everybody hear me at the back? Thank you. But it did give me a very unusual background. My specialty really is wireless radio and signals intelligence. There's very little about wireless radio from an operational perspective that I have not encountered in my career. I've done it both ashore. I've been to every province in Canada, all 3 territories. I spent 7 years in the high Arctic, 10 years up north. I spent time at sea in warships. I've been time in Greece with the NATO Army, electronic warfare. I've been in Germany in the Black Forest with the Canadian Army and the NATO armies. I've been in a Jeep with my G.I. Joe, and I've driven all around the Black Forest, liaising with my NATO Army. They didn't know I was Navy, by the way, but I was watching to see what equipment they had and their procedures, methodology, and how they compared like with Canada's. So I feel quite qualified to talk on the subject. Everything tonight we'll be talking about electromagnetic radiation, so therefore we really should talk briefly about the electromagnetic spectrum. Very briefly, when you go and you have an X-ray with your doctor or your dentist, you're dealing up in these frequency ranges up there. They're very, very high frequencies, and they can hurt your body. They can hurt like an atom, okay? They can liberate electrons. What we're talking about is down here. There's violet, ultraviolet wave, there's visible light, there's infrared. Now we're getting down, there's radio, there's ultrasonic, and there's sound. Now we're talking in here microwaves, okay? And there's 1 gigahertz, and so that's the range we're talking about. From a human point of view, or anything living, very dangerous, as the Russians found out. I joined the Navy in 1952. The Russians started to irradiate the US Embassy in Moscow. Nikita Khrushchev was the president at the time. And they experimented for 23 years. I got out of the Navy 2 years later. So my period in the military embraced, or bracketed, if you like, very nicely, the Russian experiment on American embassy staff. The staff were in the embassy there for the longest 4 years, the shortest period of time, 2 years. So their exposure time was maximum 4 years. What you're going to be exposed to here is for the rest of your life. They experimented with the same frequencies that are being radiated at you from your microwave oven, from your cordless, your Wi-Fi, your cordless phones, baby monitors, and a few other devices which I'll cover. Two consecutive ambassadors died of cancer. A third suffered leukemia-like symptoms, including like beating of eyes. He had to eventually be repatriated to the US, where he subsequently died of those injuries. At least 16 women contracted like breast cancer. Virtually all of the staff came down with illnesses of some form, and they're listed there on the board for you. The shocking thing about this is the Americans found out about this within a year. Now, you would think that any democratic country would either defend their people or get them the heck out of there, but they didn't. They chose that opportunity to observe what was happening to their own staff, literally. They sent scientists over with instruments to determine what frequencies were they being irradiated, what powers, how long. They only did it for 6 to 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. What the Americans did was simply use that opportunity to observe for themselves the effects of low-level, long-term exposure, non-thermal radiation would have on people. They waited for 10 years before they finally told their own staff. I mean, that's pretty hard to believe, but they waited 10 years. And then they started to pay their staff danger pay to actually go. Oh, and I should mention, the power they radiated, in many, many cases, was less power than you're using your cell phone, your cordless phone, and your baby monitors, which I'll tell you about later. Also, like when I joined in 1952, because I joined a special branch of communications, I went up to the Arctic. Virtually all of my colleagues, contemporaries, they either went to the East Coast aboard ships, like warships, or they went to the West Coast. Those who went to the West Coast went off to Korea, the Korean War. So we have evidence now, 40 years, evidence, where they've tracked those people and determined what health effects they had from serving aboard warships. Like when you're on a ship, you have various radars. You have a very high power long-range radar, and that can actually generate or emit like megawatts, like millions of watts, or say 500 kilowatts, which are like 500 thousands of watts. Unlike what we're talking about here, like in the home, where you're talking about like maybe a watt, or maybe say 250 milliwatts. So on the graph you see on your left, this just shows relative exposure, relative injuries. On the black tower, that shows you total deaths. The next one, the gray, is the total illnesses. The third one to the right shows you the cancers, and the lowest tower shows you the lymphatic cancers. The non-radar personnel, like for example cooks, finance, admin, stokers, they would be on the left, they'd have the least exposure, so they'd be on like in your left column. The one in the middle would be like the middle exposure. The tower on, or the column on the right, that's your radar operators, your radio operator, because they have to go out and maintain radio towers and transmitters. So you can see that the more exposure you got, the more illnesses and harmful effects you resulted from that. By 1971, the U.S. Naval Medical Research, NMRI, they had referenced 2,300 research articles listing more than 120 illnesses attributed to radio frequency and non-ionizing. By non-ionizing, they mean, like, for example, your X-ray, that's an ionizing radiation. Non-ionizing means simply there's not enough energy there to liberate an electron, meaning it's not really harmful to you. Pardon me. In 1975, the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency, the DIA, it warned its own people, all of its staff, of the dangers of low-level microwave radiation, and told them of the illnesses ranging from microwave sickness, which they've known about for over 50 years, flu-like symptoms, depression, suicidal tendencies, to cancers and leukemia. We've known this for 50 years. We actually have known this for 60 years, but it's been kept secret. Barry Trower is a very distinguished scientist, British Army. My specialty was electronic warfare. His specialty was microwave warfare. His job, in part, was to debrief the defecting Soviet scientists when they defected to the West. And in his interrogations, he was able to compile a list of 31 specific frequencies that the Russians had determined, with all their years of experience, that specific frequency had a specific effect on a human body at a specific radiation rate. Very, very low power. Each of us is what they call a bioelectric being. We all have a very fine or small, weak electrical current in us. It's a direct current, not alternating current. It's a direct current. It's about 7 hertz. That's the frequency. And there's nothing more harmful to a bioelectric being like us, or your animals like your pets at home, or the birds, any living form, including plants, even bumblebees, than a pulsing microwave at the frequencies that we're getting them in all these devices we have, the worst of which, I will tell you, will be a smart meter. He has said, as you can read there in red, the saddest and most despicable document ever published in history. This is from the Freedom of Information Act. The document lists all of the health hazards caused by wireless devices and concludes they should be kept secret to preserve industrial profit. That was back in 1976. He went on to say, he cited a 1950s report stating, if this paper becomes known around the world, it will threaten military and commercial interests. He especially condemned Health Canada's Code 6, which I'll tell you about, stating that the science-based safety level published in the Bioinitiative report, which I'll also tell you about, which is 0.1 microwatt centimeter squared, not Canada's 600 to 1,000. At the frequency that we're talking about, 2.4 megahertz, it's actually 1,000 compared to that 0.1, which is recommended. Wireless devices all emit EMR. The device has been around the longest have been cell phones. So scientists have been able to experiment and examine cell phones now for over 30 years. They know the harm cell phones cause. The point that I ask you to remember is that EMR is EMR regardless of source. Whether it's from a smart meter, whether it's from your cell phone or baby monitor, your microwave oven is different in that your microwave oven, although it's 2.4 gigahertz, it's a constant frequency. It's not pulsed. It's safer. If you wanted to actually cook food better, you'd be better off using a pulse microwave like in your cell phone than a microwave oven. That's the truth. but very few people know that. All of those in red that you see, like the microwave oven, cordless phones, Wi-Fi routers, Bluetooth, baby monitors, and smart meters, they all have one thing in common, and that is they all transmit at 2.4 gigahertz, one of the most dangerous frequencies for a human. I had just within the past 2 weeks, one of our volunteers there sent me an email and brought to my attention that she just received her fall catalog from Sears. In that catalog, it listed 3 baby monitors for sale, all operating at 2.4 gigahertz. One, the range is 1,000 feet. The other range was 2,000 feet. Can you imagine some young couple, they've just had their first baby. They bought the bassinet, or the crib, and they put their loving little child in there, and they want to protect it, make sure it's okay, so they go out and they buy a state-of-the-art monitor that'll read 2,000 blinking feet, 2.4 gigahertz, pulsing all the time, never shuts off. So you put that unknowingly, innocently on that crib, and you put the other one on your belt. And then when you go to bed, you put it on your night table so you can hear it. That thing is pulsing 24 hours a day. You're pulsing the thing you love, as well as yourself. I think that's shocking that that's allowed, but it is allowed. I should also mention like these cell phone towers. I mean, they're just terrible things where, and again, our government is not protecting us. Do you know that whether it's TELUS or Rogers or whomever, they can come in and they can put a cell phone tower up just about anywhere they want, and you cannot stop them, and your mayor cannot stop them, and your provincial government cannot stop them? That's where industry is today. I'll show you a map shortly. Voila, there it is. That's your cell phone towers across the country. They each have a range of about, typically 25 to 30 miles, depending on the terrain. But it's blanketed, coast to coast. All you have to do is just go in and Google cell phone towers Canada, and that will come up, okay? And by the way, I have references for all this material. At the very end, I'll give you all the websites that if you need them or if you like them. Everything I say I can support. The Freiberger Appeal, 2002. Initially, this was signed by 270 medical consultants, scientists, GPs, like general practitioners, members of parliament, physicians. It now has many thousands of signatures around the world. It lists 13 severe chronic illnesses and various disorders involving behavior, blood, heart, cancers. The 3 most vulnerable things are your brain, your heart, and cells to 2.4 gigahertz. So it shows blood, heart, cancers, migraines, tinnitus, that's ringing of the ear, that's from cell phone, susceptibility to infections and sleeplessness, all ascribed to pulse, and that's the key word, pulse. All these devices pulse. Your smart meters pulse, both radio transmitters in there from mobile radio communications. Independent scientists say this is the biggest single technological experiment mankind has ever endured without the knowledge or the consent of the public. And that's what's happening. The increased illnesses over the past 30 years corresponds almost exactly to the proliferation of Wi-Fi devices. In Ontario today, more than 1 in 10 children, more than 1 in 100 children is autistic. 30 years ago, it was 1 in 10,000. I mean, think about that in just 30 years. From 1 in 10,000 to 1 in 100. It is possible today that as many as 1 in 100 women will give birth to an autistic child. But I'll show you a slide later of a scientist who's in Seattle, Washington, and he'll show you that if you have a meter like I have, like this, it's a radio frequency meter. If he can go into the bedroom or the home where that mother, the pregnant woman is, if he can measure the radiation in her home, he can tell her with a great degree of accuracy whether there's a chance that she will have an autistic child just by the level of EMR. And the reason this is so surprising is because we already are living in a very heavily polluted, what they call electro pollution. but we don't know it. But look at all the devices we have. How many here have Wi-Fi routers at home? Oh, so did we, by the way, but we got rid of it. How many here have cordless phones? So did we. We had 5 of them. I mean, I was like you. I just assumed, even with my military, I just assumed that Health Canada would be looking after me. I assumed that we'd have safe standards. Trust me, you got to have a look. You got to get rid of that cordless phone. It's the most dangerous thing. It's always on. It never, even when you put it back on the cradle, it's always pulsing 24 hours a day. We had 5 of them. In Europe, at least, and Europe is far ahead of us. In Europe, when you get a cordless phone, you hang it up, it shuts off the power. Not in North America. Why? Because they can get away with it. People just don't know somehow. The most dangerous thing, second only to a doggone smart meter. They did a study on children, on people using cell phones, a 10-year study. Because scientists have been able to study cell phones for 30 years, they now know that the latency period is 10 years or more. For some people, it may be 15 years, some people like 20 years. And some people escape, like I smoked heavily for 25 years, and somehow I managed to survive. My wife died of cancer, like lung cancer. I was lucky. And there will be some people who will not be affected by EMR, but that'll be like minority. The Russians have come out and they essentially forbid anybody under 18 to be exposed to wireless. They're the ones who did all this experimentation. They know what they're talking about, and they won't let their kids, they won't have it in school. They won't allow it in school. But we do, and I'll tell you why later on. Smart meters, the health crisis of our time. Please take note of that name, that Dietrich Klinghardt. That's the scientist in California. He's a medical doctor with a PhD. Very impressive. He says everything I'm saying, and he said it better, and he's got more of a pedigree. But it's if you only could look at one video, look at this one. He's the one that'll tell you about, for example, the meter in a mother's bedroom or in the home and how important it is. And he'll tell you like how many 6,000 studies they've looked at, all pointing in the same direction, despite what industry tells you, despite what government tells you. This other Dr. Robert Becker, he was twice nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. He too has said, I have no doubt in my mind that at the present time, the greatest polluting element in the Earth's environment is the proliferation of electromagnetic fields. I consider that to be far greater on a global scale than warming and the increase in chemical elements in the environment. Now, he says electromagnetic fields. I use the term electromagnetic radiation. They are indeed different, but in terms of the average layman, they're virtually synonymous, like they're interchangeable, okay? The Russian warnings, they urge pregnant women to avoid using a cell phone at any cost. Similarly, they say children under 18. And look at these other countries. Germany, India, for God's sake. India just reduced the amount of the amount of radiation they allow their cell phone towers to emit. They've just reduced that by a factor of 10, just this last month. That's India, and we think we're a developed country. UK, Israel, Finland, Belgium, and even the city of Toronto have issued health warnings for children. And they say children should not use cell phones only in emergencies, and even then, it should only be on a speakerphone. And by the way, and here again, I was guilty. Like I was one of the first people to have a BlackBerry. Like I've had 2 careers of equal length. And I used to travel a lot in my business. And I was one of the first people that had a BlackBerry. And I like clients that run different countries of the world. And I was one of the first people. I paid $7,000 for a Toshiba 3700 laptop. I used to use it on my laptop. Well, you never use a laptop on your app because of the radiation. Today, there's incidents of infertility. So doctors now tell you, don't use a laptop on your lap. Seriously. Don't use your cell phone. How many here own a BlackBerry? I did. And I never ever, and I used to think I was pretty techie, but I never looked in my manual. But in the manual, it tells you, do not put that thing within 15/16 of an inch to your head. That's like almost an inch. If you own an Apple or an iPhone or any other kind of phone, if you look in the owner's manual, it'll tell you don't put it within 5/8 of an inch your head. Even Health Canada, within the past 6 months, has changed their website. They finally now say they caution children not to use cell phones, and if they do, use them on speakerphone. Like they're dragging Health Canada into the 21st century at our expense. Electro hypersensitivity, the EHS as it is known, and it's just generally agreed that between 3 to 5% of any population suffers from EHS. The most famous person was Norway's Prime Minister, Gro Harlem Brundtland. She also is the former director of the World Health Organization, like the WHO. And they're the signs, there's the symptoms: headaches, dizziness, disrupted sleep, insomnia, fatigue, nausea, heart palpitations, memory loss, tinnitus, skin rashes, muscle and joint pain, leg and foot pain, tingling, irritability, numbness, nosebleeds, depression, anxiety, etc. In Sweden, there are 248 citizens who are actually registered with the government, certified as being EHS. It's an officially recognized disability in Sweden. The employers must take that into consideration on the workplace and make allowances for those workers. We're really far behind here in North America. Illnesses linked to EMR, meaning any of those devices, okay? Many kinds of cancers, neurological conditions, ADD. That Barry Trower I mentioned, that British scientist, he's about my age. He came out of retirement only because he heard that the city of Portland was allowing a cell phone tower in the schoolyard operating on the same frequency that they used to use back in the Cold War. And he just got so disgusted, he came out of retirement, and he now travels the world at his own expense, acting as an expert witness on behalf of people who are victimized by this. And he has said, there's not a school in the world, anywhere, on any continent, that has allowed Wi-Fi in their schools that is not now having difficulty with their children, either behavioral, ADD, not a school. Lloyd's of London will not insure phone manufacturers against damage to users' health. And that's one of the world's top insurance companies. And they say that cell phones are today what tobacco was 40 years ago. Now, I keep saying cell phones because we've had the longest, that we've studied them for 30 years. But the same frequencies are inside that smart meter. So when I say cell phones at any time, I mean your Wi-Fi router, I mean your cell phone, I mean your baby monitor, I mean all these things, okay? Don't just think of cell phone. It's EMR, regardless of source. Smart meters. Along comes our government. Bill 17, 2010, Gordon Campbell, Clean Energy Act. And I have a copy of that legislation. What the government did not do, it did not tell the utilities how or what technology you must use to connect these meters, how they will talk to each other. The utilities have made that decision on their own. You notice that in Japan and the state of Idaho, they obviously have responsible and informed governments because they insist that every single home is connected via fiber optic cable. Safest thing in the world. No negatives. Faster, more secure, no negatives at all other than it costs money. But I don't see the problem because the utility will simply pass that money on to the customer. Italy done the next best thing. All 26 million homes in Italy, they use fiber optic, power line carrier. What they do there, they simply superimpose the frequency or the data coming from your home on top of the telephone cable or your power line, like your household power coming into your house. So that's the second best, but it's not nearly as harmful as wireless. The industry's chosen wireless for two reasons. One, it's cheaper, and we're going to pay for it anyhow, the meters, and I'll tell you about that later. But also, microwave frequencies, they go through walls. And that was one of the key things. They go through walls. The two transmitters inside that meter, one will travel for 246 feet, And that's the industry figures, not mine. I suspect it's quite a bit further than that. The other one will travel up to 3 kilometers. And that was Dr. Andrew McCrinsky, a Canadian scientist, who said that, up to 3K. Like 3 kilometers. Health Canada, who's supposed to look after us. Now, these are the same people that looked after us so well with tobacco and asbestos and DDT and lead. So to protect us, they came up with this thing called Safety Code 6. And they use what they call guidelines. And I use the word guideline, or that is, I draw your attention to that, because if they knew what was safe, they would have used the word standard. But no country in the world has ever done a study. Nobody knows what is safe in microwave. No one. Not even the Russians. We don't know how low you have to go before you're safe. Because what is safe for you is not safe for a child. It's not safe for an embryo. They've never studied children. So no government knows. And so each government is left up to themselves to establish guidelines. And we call ours Safety Code 6. So what did we do? We didn't do our own study. We simply went over to industry, like the telecom, said, like, what do you guys have? So they gave their studies to, and I'm not exaggerating, this is exactly what happened. And they simply adopted industry standard, and that's what we have today. But what they don't tell you is that the industry standard was established about 20, 30 years ago. It was a standard established for electricians that work on, like industrial electricians that work on high power, high voltage. And they established it for 6 minutes, just 6 minutes, and it's for a 6-foot man weighing 200 pounds with a 10-foot head, or a 10-pound head, sorry, a 10-pound head, shoot. Sorry, a 10-pound head. That's the gospel truth. And so what has happened over the last, say, 25, 30 years? They simply have, that's eroded. And now that same, what they call exposure limit, that's how much our government says you can be exposed to 24 hours a day, 365 days a year for the rest of your life. What happened in that 6 minutes? So Canada's never done its own studies. They simply adopted the industry study, and the industry studies are based purely on thermal, just like your microwave oven. Their belief is, and their theory is, if the radiation does not warm your skin, it has to be harmless. Well, it couldn't be further from the truth. Scientists have proven that the non-thermal effects, thousands upon thousands upon thousands of times lower, and I'll show you, harm our cells, harm our tissue, harm our organs. So our so-called guidelines totally ignore the biological, like the non-thermal effects. Those terms are interchangeable, like non-thermal and biological, okay? So Canada established our RF. RF means like radio frequency, exposure limits, and they set them at 1,000. That other thing is like microwatts per centimeter squared. Don't let that fool you. Just look at the numbers in red. It's the relative size of the number, like 1,000 to 10 to 100 to 0.1. That's what you have to take notice of. So our guidelines, our government says that you can be exposed to 1,000 microwatts per centimeter squared. Now that means from all sources, like everything in your house, as well as your smart meter, the 2 radios, which I'll talk about fairly shortly, as well as your cell phone and your baby monitors and your wireless security system and all that stuff. A total of 1,000. Italy and Russia and China and most European countries and Switzerland and Austria, their standards are at least 100 times lower than ours, meaning safer. And theirs are based on thermal, or the 30-minute exposure. Even the Toronto Board of Health back in 1999, that's what, 13 years ago? Toronto recommended to Health Canada, lower our standards by 100. They're just totally ignored. 13 years ago. Now, the Bio-Initiative report, that was a major, it's actually held up as kind of a Bible today by scientists around the world. 2007. 14 scientists from different countries got together, and they reviewed over 2,000 studies, all of which had linked EMR to harmful effects like in humans. They distilled that down, and they ended up producing a report, a 650-page report. But the bottom line was they urged all countries around the world, every single country, reduce your standard, like your exposure limit, down to 0.1. And like in Canada's case, that means we have to lower ours 10,000 times. It's the worst in the world. But if you talk to Health Canada, which I have done, they immediately reach up the shelf and they pull out this pro forma thing and they shove it to you and they say, safety code 6, you're protected, and we have one of the highest standards in the world. And that is exactly what they tell you. They really do tell you we have one of the highest standards in the world. Try them on for size. We actually have the lowest standard in the world. But they won't even engage you in any kind of a dialogue. There's the exposure level on the side. Okay, so I've got to see if I can. Does this work at all? Yeah, there's your exposure level here. This is where we are right now. That's our limit. 1,000. Look at the illnesses. Cell phone users get more headaches, memory loss, fatigue, loss of concentration. That's back in 1998. In 1998, we didn't even have smartphones here. And do you know, by the way, that today there are over 6 million cell phones in the world? And the population of the Earth is only about 7, a little over 7 billion. We're already 6 billion. That's staggering, really. It's doubled. And they expect that this year, half of the population of Canada will have smart meters. Smartphones, sorry. So there's where we are, and this is where the scientists say we should be. And even there, look at that. Residential cancer, sleep disturbance, chronic fatigue, dose response for neurological effects, DNA damage balanced by repair. Look at that, look, way down here, this is 10 to the minus 5. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, that's 1 million times lower. Solar storms, stress, heart attack, reduced melatonin, migraine, headache. That's how susceptible and delicate and fragile is the human electrical being that we are. So that bioinitiative report, they're not being extremists. They're saying, let's get down to 0.1 and then try to find out what is safe for the majority. Like, there'll never be a safe level for everyone. There'll always be somebody susceptible. But they're saying, let's try to find out what is safe for the majority of people. The World Health Organization. Now remember, this is a year after our government imposed those doggone things. But the World Health Organization, which is made up of 194 countries, and if you look at the executive committee, which I have, you'll find it's made up, I can't remember how many nations, but something like a dozen nations set up their executive committee. And they're virtually all small third world countries, but with one big exception, the US is on there. So, and I guess I'm implying that the US have inordinate influence. And if one of the smaller countries came up with a recommendation that was detrimental to the US thought or in their interest, the US could fairly easily put significant pressure on them to maybe change their mind. As a consequence, the WHO is very, very slow to change. Anyhow, they finally did. The evidence was insurmountable. They came out in May of 2011, and they announced to the world that EMR, from any source, is a possible carcinogen, like a class 2B. 2A is possible, 1A is definite, okay? So a 2B carcinogen. Had I been premier of BC, I would have immediately, I'm assuming somebody apprised me of this, I would have immediately called my health ministry and also industry, and I'd say, stop those smart meters, or stop that wireless stuff. It can't happen. It hasn't happened. We're still getting no smart meter. You don't have any choice. You can't opt out. And you can't contact, and they have, anybody heard of the name Dr. John Blatherwick? I was in Ottawa and visited for 27 years, and he used to come on TV maybe twice a year, and he would, and I always thought of him being like probably a competent medical doctor, like a GP, but he would know nothing about EMR. I mean, GPs are not trained in EMR. Very few people know anything about EMR. But anyhow, he would come on twice a year, and he would tell us that, oh, it's time for flu, you should get a shot. And so people listened to him, and I suppose most people respected him. We had no reason not to. But then he retired, and BC Hydro went out and he retained him as their medical expert. And I've seen him on TV, I've seen him on YouTube. He's talking about EMR, and he's actually made the statement that he was quite agitated, and he said, microwave can't penetrate the skin. Well, I mean, he just made an utter fool of himself. He ended up having to apologize when somebody challenged him later on. And he said, well, I have a friend who's a physicist, and he told me that. I guess I was mistaken. Like, I'm sorry. But he's a medical expert for them. That's how lightly and casually they're taking this. The independent scientists say, oh, and I must tell you, 1990, you all heard of the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency in the US? In 1990, that's 22 years ago, they did a review of about 200 studies, all of which had linked EMR to adverse effects like in humans. And they came to the conclusion that the evidence was just, you couldn't ignore it. So they came out with a recommendation recommending the US government classify EMR a possible carcinogen. In fact, 22 years ago. When that, and they really said in a draft form, when the military, US military, and the industry, and the software programming companies heard of that recommendation, they dumped all over the EPA, who hurriedly brought that excuse me, that report back in-house. They massaged it. Essentially, all they did, they took off that recommendation, but the conclusion is still the same, that the evidence is there. The link is unmistakable from EMR to adverse health effects like in humans. And that was 22 years ago. So there's been a lot of resistance. Like industries had huge, and don't forget the telecom industry is the most powerful in the world. The revenues last year were over $1 trillion. I just had a look at Fortis BC's board of directors. Interesting. You should do it for yourself. They've got I used to be in executive recruitment. I did a fair amount of work in healthcare and engineering and all that kind of stuff. So I knew Ida Goodrow more by reputation. I don't think I've ever met her, but she's on the board of directors. She used to be the head person in not interior health, but one of the major health districts like in the Lower Mainland, and now she's on the board of directors of Fortis BC. They've also got one of the major First Nations people representing the Squamish First Nation band on their board. I mean, very astute, mind you, very clever. They also have somebody who's in Summerland. I can't remember his name, but he owns a major vineyard. And he evidently has approached Penticton to sell their power to Fortis. They declined. He's also approached Summerland to sell their power to, like their utility, to sell it to Fortis, and they too have declined. But that's the way business is done. So getting back to this, shortly after that happened in 1990, and by the way, their budget at that time in $1990 was about $870,000, which today would maybe be a couple of $1 million a year. That budget was soon cut to $25,000 a year. That showed that they earned somebody's displeasure. And then a couple of years after that, the responsibility for EMR was taken from EPA and given to the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, which is heavily influenced by the government and military and industry. And then in 1996, we've all heard of Senator John McCain, who ran against Obama for the presidency a few years ago. He was the one that pioneered the bill, the 1996 the Telecommunications Act in the US. Devastating effect, but they didn't know at the time. And what that did, it took away the authority of every state government in the US, every municipal government, and the telecom companies then could go anywhere they want and install a cell phone tower wherever they wanted with it, almost impunity. And they can install them on seniors' homes, schools, nursing homes, hospitals, and they do. If you haven't done it, you've got to start paying attention, because you're going to have a cell phone in your neighbor. And by the way, all this stuff is going to affect adversely your home, especially if you allow a smart meter on your home. Your price is going to go down. If I'm looking for my next house, I'll tell you, my realtor will have certain guidelines for me. I don't want to be within 500 meters of a cell phone tower. I don't want to be anywhere near any home that has a smart meter on it. And you're going to be the same way once more people get informed. Eventually, because see, this same stuff I'm telling you about is going to affect John Fowler, the present CEO of Fortis BC, but he doesn't know about this stuff, believe it or not. If you think I'm crazy, just think, one of the biggest champions of blackberries in the U.S., in the world probably, is Barack Obama. Well-educated, as is his wife, and he's probably the biggest marketing guru, but he uses BlackBerry all the time. Bill Gates, one of the richest men in the world, I'll bet you money he knows nothing about EMR. Stephen Jobs, the inventor of Apple, one of the brightest guys in his field, peculiar, mind you, but brilliant in some respects, would know nothing about EMR. Highly, highly specialized fields. Most of the people in any of these utilities don't know anything about EMR. I have challenged, I'm not kidding, I have a challenge for BC to debate with me EMR and mesh grids and smart meters in public with the media there, with Fortis there, and they won't accept my challenge. I have challenged the mayor and council to debate with me in public with the media there, with Fortis there, and they won't accept my challenge. They can't defend what they tell you. Dr. Annie Sasko, 3 Harvard degrees, PhD in epidemiology. Within the WHO, they have an agency called the IARC, the International Agency for the Research on Cancer. She headed that up for 22 years. She oversaw all their studies. She's the previous director. Just last year, she said, and I can quote, "Despite what industry says, we have concrete," that's her word, not mine, "we have concrete evidence that wireless devices and cell phones cause cancer." This year, at the International Conference in London, England, on cancer in children, she said EMR should be classified 2A, a probable cause of cancer. When she got back to France, to the university where she was teaching, her job was no longer there. And I've seen all kinds of examples of where scientists speaking out, they've had their funding cut off, they've been blackballed, they've been they've been like character assassination. Dr. George Carlo, CTIA stands for Cellular Telecommunications Industry Association. It in the US is what the Canadian Wireless and Telecommunications is in Canada. It represents the industry. They came to him and asked him to head up a $28.5 million US study, a multi-year study on cell phones, which he did. He had 200 scientists working for him. The study, initially, the results were quite benign. The longer the study went on, the more the evidence started to build up that there was a direct link to EMR and various illnesses, tumors and cancers and that. When the result was finally released, the industry immediately quashed it. They blackballed him, they maligned him, tried character assassination. That's what industry does. Just like the tobacco, exactly like the tobacco, only this is worse. At least with tobacco, if you smoked, I could close my door and my window. With this EMR, you cannot. Well, the range is 3 kilometers in one, and at least several hundred feet the other, and it goes through walls. Dr. David Carpenter, he's the Dean of Medicine of the University of Albany, and he has several YouTubes which are very interesting, and he's quite emphatic that it causes cancer. Robert Kane is another scientist. He's now dead. He was a research scientist for Motorola for 30 years. He was also a product design engineer. He actually designed their telephones. He contracted cancer. He sued Motorola. He had 2 of the world's best scientists as expert witnesses for him. But the pockets of industry are such that they got the best lawyers and they managed somehow to disqualify his expert witnesses in the eyes of the law. So he lost the case. He died certainly thereafter from cell phone cancer. He wrote, but not before he wrote a book, Cell Phones and Russian Roulette, which you can buy. Just within the past 2 months, this last one, the Safe Schools 2012, has just been released. Like it's quite hot off the press. And it's a major study by six medical associations, and these are national medical, like in the States, I think it's the American Academy of Environmental Scientists, and there's some other word after physicians. But anyhow, it's a national body of environmental doctors. And the Irish doctors, which is the national body in Ireland, and plus like there are 4 others, plus there are 21 other independent scientists from all around the world, and they've come out in that school, Safe Schools 2012, and they said that no school should have Wi-Fi. No children should be exposed to Wi-Fi. But what do we do in Canada? We're pushing it in. Why? Bernard Lord. Anybody know Bernard Lord? Bernard Lord used to be the Premier of New Brunswick, 2 consecutive terms. Majority government did a very good job, evidently. Lawyer by training, Queen's Counsel, Order in New Brunswick. Very strong, progressive conservative card-carrying member. He's already kind of been earmarked that he'll be certainly in consideration to succeed Stephen Harper when Stephen Harper eventually steps aside or is defeated. And that's true. You can look on the internet. He made a major convention speech in Edmonton in, I think, 1997 when they were looking for a leader to replace Joe Clark. And he got up, and he's fluently bilingual, of course. And he made a very impressive speech to the extent that people noted him and have set him aside as being somebody to consider very seriously once Stephen Harper is no longer there. But right now, and for the last 3 years, he's been the president and CEO of the Canadian Wireless and Telecommunications Association. It is he who is pushing the wireless in Canada. That's his mandate as president and CEO, is to explore and exploit every possible avenue to further the growth of wireless technology. And when he was in New Brunswick, he had quite a conflagration with New Brunswick Power and Newfoundland Power, and guess who owns? There's a relationship between Fortis BC, they actually own Newfoundland Power now. So his contacts in power are second to none. His contacts in industry are second to none. He's also on the board of directors of one of the major school associations, national. So his contacts are, which is why he was chosen for the job. If I were a shareholder, I'd be ecstatic with his success. He has surpassed everyone's expectation. But that is why, as parents, you can't stop that school board from putting a doggone tower in near your school. But you should be able to, given what all the other countries are taking them out. The Catholic School Board in Ontario is taking them all out. They won't allow them in. Lakehead University is taking them all out. Why are we getting them forced on us in the public schools? Who said they had cordless DEC? Again, like DEC means digital enhanced cordless telephone, okay? 2.4 gigahertz, one of the most dangerous, probably the most dangerous frequency up there from a human perspective. This is the highest, the most dangerous number I've seen anywhere in all my research, 470%. That's how much you increase your chances of getting cancer if you've used it for like 10 years, have it in the house. And you can never shut them off, pulsing all the time. Like I have a meter here. What do I do with it? If I took this meter, say, and I turned it on into your, wherever your cordless phone, this would go right off the scale. Well, but speaking of that, I must tell you, my wife and I just got this last week, so we tried it out. And we live in a pretty nice home. We have, like most homes, we have like a microwave oven. And I knew that most microwave ovens leaked. And I expected ours to leak a little bit. But from our microwave, from our kitchen, where the microwave oven is, say, probably where that curtain is, and our living room, the fireplace, and probably about here, and like, as God is my judge, I had this on right off the scale. That's with the door closed, just heating up a glass of water. That's the leakage in our own blinking home. So don't use your microwave oven if you don't have to, and do yourself a favor. Try to find somebody who has a meter. Just see for yourself what you're exposing yourself to. It's scary. It really is scary. Smart meter versus cell. Fortis BC will tell you. I just find this, I have great difficulty believing that anybody could say this. They say that you can stand beside your smart meter for 20 years. I mean, just think about that. 20 years, and you get no more radiation than from a cell phone in just a 130-minute call. That's absolutely preposterous. Here I have a smart meter, which mine is always off unless I need to use it. It's always off now. I've smartened up. Sorry, smartphone, thank you. I do make those mistakes once in a while. But all of the energy in a smartphone or any phone is concentrated only to the antenna. The antenna is right there. So it's highly focused, highly concentrated, okay? When you put that like in your head, that is all going into your brain, literally. Even the most conservative scientists will tell you that at least 50% of that radiation is being absorbed in your brain. They will say as much as 90%, depending on who you listen to. So it's anywhere from 50 to 90% is absorbed in your brain, okay? Now so it's highly focused, highly concentrated. When you look at a smart meter, or even like your cordless phone that is beeping all the time, that just radiates, it fills the room. It's like walking in a room that's filled with smoke. So when you walk in, it's whole body radiation. So you can't compare that apple to this orange, okay? It's like if I jump into water, my entire body is covered with water. If I walk into a smoke-filled room, my entire body. So when you use a smart meter, okay, it's whole body radiation. So to compare the two, you have to extrapolate that energy into the same unit of measurement as a smart meter. And this Dr. Daniel Hirsch, who's a nuclear physicist at the University of California, the Santa Cruz campus, he has compared the two. Also, the Santa Cruz Public Health Department did an independent scientific study comparing the two. And their findings are quite shocking, very, very different than what any utility tells you. They say that as a minimum, that smart meter, and by the way, they're only talking about one radio, but there are two in there, which I'll tell you about later. And Hydro never talks about that second one, conveniently. So they say that a minimum, that smart meter radiates at least 45 times more than your cell phone. And that's 10 feet away from the meter. If you're within 3 feet of that doggone meter, it radiates 450 times. That's the truth, 450 times. But you can never discuss that with a utility. There's a chart. The one on your left, that's your cell phone, the very one, the furthest one on the left. The red is the maximum, the blue is minimum. Like say the front and the back, okay? The next column over, that's your microwave oven. So you can see your microwave oven. The red is the maximum. That's much higher than your cell phone. And of course, the blue in the front means like the minimum. Then you have your smart meter. And that's just the one radio now. But look how much more radiation you're getting from it. And then the next column to the right is the smart meter at the 10-foot range, 45 times. But then you have your, looks like, can I read that? You've got good vision, eh? Show off. But I mean, it just shows, like you think of your Wi-Fi router in your cell phone, it shows you these are actual scientific measurements that you can trust. Now I'll tell you how a smart meter works in a mesh grid. A mesh grid, they visualize 5,000 homes, okay? Now, Kelowna has a population of about 106,000, which means there'd be 21 mesh networks there, okay? But let's just talk about one, 5,000 homes. If you have 5,000 homes, that means you have 5,000 smart meters. If you have 5,000 smart meters, that means you have 10,000 transmitting receivers, because in each smart meter, there are 2 transmitters and receivers. They mentioned radio. Radio is such a benign word. A radio is a passive device. You listen to a radio, okay? These are not passive devices. These are active. They pulse, okay, and then they receive. So there's a transmitter and there's a receiver. Excuse me. So a very big difference. So let's just talk about the one transmitter that all the utilities talk about, and they call it the LAN, the Local Area Network. That's the one that connects all these 5,000 meters together. Now, let's just pretend for the moment that the utility is in that direction, okay? I don't care whether it's 50 miles or 500 miles, but the utility is in that direction. So, and if we're the community, our data has to get down there. If I'm in the community, I want to live in that end, and I'll tell you why. Because the characteristics of microwave frequencies, they're line of sight. They do not bend out, they don't deflect off the ionosphere, they go right straight through, okay? So in my radio transmitter, and I'm talking about just the one now, the LAN, my transmitter has to see a receiving antenna, otherwise I cannot make communication. So the way this is designed and engineered, my LAN has to be able to relay my data at least 2 others. There's always got to be a backup, like redundancy is built in. If a vehicle pulls up in front of your house and blocks the path, okay, there's got to be an alternate path. And these meters are always talking to each other to ensure that there's synchronization and that it's effective in operating, even if there's no data. They're constantly signaling each other, which hydros don't tell you about. They have to do this to make sure they're synchronized and secure. So just that one radio in my home, it has to convey my data from my furnace and all my appliances back to the utility. To do that, it has to relay from the various homes on the way toward in that direction. At the other end of this network or community or the community, there's a thing called a collector meter, which hydros don't tell you about either. It has 3 radio transmitters, pulsing microwave, okay? So all of our data is going to end up at that collector. And by the way, that collector can actually be on your house, or it could be on a pole-mounted thing. They don't tell you, and you'll never know. It looks the same from the front, it's just deeper in the side profile, like in terms of depth. But it's the same. It has your local area network transmitter and receiver. It has a Zigbee transmitter and receiver. And it has what they call the wireless wide area network transmitter and receiver in there. And that can be on your house, and you'll never know it. And it's going constantly pulsing. They've actually measured the radio, and it exceeds something like 600 times the EPA rating. That's scary. I mean, just scary. How can you ever think of having family and even like your pets, for God's sake? I mean, they suffer just as much as we do. But anyhow, that's just and that's just going one direction. So all my data has got to go through all these other homes, up to 500 relays, and this is, there's an engineering firm in California called SAGE, S-A-G-E Associates. If you just Google them, you can actually get a report telling you how these things work, how the meters work. So everything I'm telling you is in their report, okay? SAGE Associates. They also contributed to the Bioinitiative report. So all of my data has to go as many as 500 times. The closer you are to that end, to where their collector is, the more relays you're going to wear. So you're going to wear everybody's radiation on your house, like in addition to your own. But you can't touch it, you can't see it, you can't feel it, you can't smell it, you can't hear it, okay? Now, every time that utility wants to send some instruction this way to every one of our 5,000 homes, you're going to have these same relays again. This is never mentioned by any of the utilities. Now let's get to the dangerous stuff. This other radio inside every home's meter is called a Zigbee. A Zigbee has become kind of a standard like around the world. It's adopted, kind of a protocol. Very, very powerful, capable, sophisticated radio. 2.4 gigahertz. It is there for one purpose only, and that is eventually you will have smart appliances in your house. These are now being built by GE, the world's largest manufacturer. And if you are a very wealthy person today, let's say you're a hockey player, Ovechkin, and he says, I want a summer home in the Okanagan. So he gets somebody, some project manager, to build him a custom home down on the lake. And this kind of stuff happens by the affluent. So they do. They get one of the best-known architects here. They design a lovely home. They get an interior decorated furniture for them lavishly, and they get all the latest, like the best home theater, all that kind of stuff. But they'll also get like smart appliances. And the interior decorator thinks she's doing their client like a heck of a favor because they got state-of-the-art stuff. Well, every one of these appliances, they're smart because each of them has a wireless pulsing microwave transmitter built into it, pulsing way on 2.4 gigahertz. And so they send their data back to this Zigbee, this other radio transmitter inside your meter, and they'll do that, say, half a dozen times a day. But for every transmission, you need two. That is, if I'm the Zigbee and I'm interrogating my furnace, like what you're reading and that kind of stuff, for me to interrogate them, they have to reply. So that's two transmissions. Okay, so that's going to go on and say at least a half a dozen times a day. Now you've got 15 doggone appliances. That data will come back to my Zigbee. I have to get all that information from me back to the utility. How does that happen? It goes over to this LAN transmitter before. It sends it back down to the 500 homes. So every home is bathed again with all my data, and I'm bathed with all your data and all your neighbors' data. So every home is bathed with it, like anywhere up to 500 other homes' radiation, which is never discussed on any utility's website, but it's true. No one measures, no one calculates, no one can even guesstimate what kind of radiation is occurring at that collector. But that could be on your house. So in our community of 5,000 homes, you've got 75,000 smart appliances, like 5,000, times 15, okay? And then you've got the 5,000 local area network transmitters, so that's 80,000. So now you've got 85,001 pulsing microwave transmitters in just one neighborhood. That's on top of all the other stuff. You got your cell phones and your Wi-Fi routers and your baby monitors and your security systems and all that. This is what I find is just offensive, that the governments don't protect us. They don't. But if you talk to, whether it's Health Canada or Fortis BC, they speak only as if they're talking about one of those radios inside that smart meter, as if it was out over the Pacific somewhere, there's no radiation anywhere else, everything else is pure. Now just consider our little benign doggone transmitter. And that's deceitful and disingenuous. If you're looking at the city of Kelowna with 21 networks, you're looking at 1,785,001 pulsing microwave transmitters on top of all we already have. Now, what scientists are saying now is that the health professionals have to start looking at the ambient radiation that we're getting from everything. You can't look at one thing in isolation. It's just layer upon layer upon layer, and that's why they call it electric smog. Smart meter versus cell phone. Fortis says on average a meter transmits customer data 4 to 6 times a day, a total average of 1 minute per day. See, but they say like 1 minute per day as if to allay your concerns, as if to say, well, like 1 minute, I mean, you've got 23 hours and 58 minutes when there's nothing transmitting. They don't want you to realize this is pulsed wireless, the most harmful thing to a human body. In the California Court of Law, and by the way, there are a lot of lawsuits going on in California, a judge there, a female judge, directed PG&E, it's their largest utility, it's one of the largest in the US, directed them to submit in writing technical data that the court's engineers and scientists could verify and inspect, estimating how many times would an average meter pulse and up to how many might it pulse. Under duress from the court of law, they admitted that the average meter will pulse 14,000 times a day. That's every 6 seconds. These are pulses. Up to a peak of 190,000, that's 0.045, meaning more than twice a second. That's not what the utility tells you, and that's strictly the LAN. Just that one radio transmitter. It doesn't discuss all that's going on inside your house, the Zigbee and all the other 15 appliances. That's how you cannot trust your utility. And you must not trust your utility. It doesn't discuss the collector meter. It doesn't discuss any of the relays, up to 500 relays, every single direction, every single transmission that comes into your house could have caused 500 relays on 500 other homes, and you could have been one of those 500 homes for somebody else's relays. That's what gets me angry. This is done by the University of Arizona. That's the smog. So you walk out your door, I mean, you might see the sun shining and you think, God, this feels nice. But you're walking in EMR, which is harming your body, harming the cells of your body. I think that's scandalous, let alone scurrilous. This is what the utilities are really after. You can see here the blue line, or the black line, I guess, that represents a clock at the bottom from just past midnight on the left to midnight on your right. In the middle is noon, and that yellow band represents 2:30 to 7:30 p.m. That's when the demand load for the utility is highest, and that's when people come home from work and school and want to do their washing and cooking and all that kind of stuff. So the top line, the black line, that's the current load. If they put in smart meters, I'm not absolutely certain, but I've tried to look at this saying, what else could it be? That green line has to be with the introduction of a smart meter, like depressing it. I can't think of what else it could be. But the red line in particular I think, is significant. They're going to introduce two-tiered billing because they know when you need or you want to use your utility, they're going to charge you for that, and they can do that. Oh, and I should tell you, with this Zigbee, the utility can turn down any one of your appliances whenever it wants, with or without your permission. It can shut off your furnace. It can shut off your air conditioning, okay? It can just dampen it if it wishes, and you have no control over it. On top of all the other negatives. Like there's not, and I'm not exaggerating, I've been at this now for, well, getting pretty close to 2 years. And I'm not kidding, there's not one single advantage for you to have a smart meter. Your analog meter, it's all metal. It's robust, it's rugged. So, I mean, I don't know, I'm 77 years of age. I've been like in a lot of homes. I've never had one fail. I've never even known anybody who's had one fail. And now they're going to put on a smart meter, which is plastic. Inside, it has very sensitive electronics. There's been a whole history of fires all over the world. Every jurisdiction where they've introduced these, been a lot of fires, even in the Lower Mainland right now. You can buy an analog meter for 50 bucks, literally. You're going to get charged, each and every one of us, anywhere up to $500 for a smart meter. When they first came out, the utilities used to tell us in their literature that they had a lifespan of, say, 20 years. They've changed their story. It went down to 15 years, then it went down to 12 years, and now I'm seeing, like, well, I've tried to be conservative here. I've seen as low as 3 to 5 years, but I'll be like a little bit more charitable and I'll say 5 to 7 or maybe 5 to 10 years. And then guess what? When that has to be replaced, you're going to get charged again. Fortis BC says that smart meters will help keep rates lower, save customers more than $19 million, meaning like less electricity loss, and they'll lower the meter reading costs. Well, of course, they let go of the meter readers. But if I were a grow-up operator, I mean, I'm bypassing meters now. Is that going to stop me if they change to a smart meter? Will it have any effect on me at all? I don't think so. You know, so I don't see that being a very palatable or acceptable statement to make. In fact, CBC Toronto did a survey of those having smart meters. They don't have appliances yet, but just the smart meter, okay, that one transmitter, the LAN, and they found of the respondents, more than 80% said they had higher bills. Many report monthly bills doubling, tripling, even quadrupling. And I mentioned the analog meters, how durable they will last, whereas the smart meter, anywhere from like up to 8 years, I've heard. Some say up to 12 years, but you're going to have to replace them a heck of a lot more often than you're going to replace that analog. And then I mentioned like the fires. Opposition to smart meters in BC, there are 57 municipalities plus the the Union of BC Municipalities. And as you know, they had a majority vote. Like, not everybody was in agreement, but there was a majority vote. Most municipalities wanted a moratorium simply because the technology has never been proven safe. Nobody knows what is safe. So they're just trying to be prudent. And, but not Kelowna. Even though I went and I've spoken with the mayor, he shuts his back on me. That's when I found out that he used to be on the board of directors with Fortis BC. He used to be on the board of directors with BC Transit, you know, under Gordon Campbell's administration. He used to be on the board of directors for BC Lottery Corporation under Gordon Campbell's administration. He used to be, he was with the AM, FM radio broadcast industry for 31 years. He was the president of the association for like a number of those years. And now, of course, as mayor, he's trying to sell Kelowna's 1/3 owned electric power utility to Fortis BC. And for $55 million, and that $55 million he plans on investing right back into Fortis BC. Like, I'm not clairvoyant. I don't know what's going to happen to him when he eventually retires and, you know, leaves office, but I'm almost sure he'll be back on the board of directors of Fortis BC. As I say, like, I've challenged him and them to debate with me, but they simply won't. Quebec, to my surprise, without any hesitation, they said citizens can opt out. Like, in a neighborhood, it's not going to do you much good. If all your neighbors around you have smart meters and a mesh grid network, you're going to get bathed, maybe marginally less, but you're still going to be bathed. But at least there's some democracy there. There's none here. In California, 57, the same number, of which 11 have passed ordinances making installations illegal, 2 of which actually have made them criminal. National security, now that was my forte. I've spoken to the Minister, pardon me, I have written to the Minister of National Defense. Well, I started by writing to my Member of Parliament, and I actually met with him. Then I wrote to the Minister of National Defense, and I wrote to the Prime Minister, telling him that if I were an enemy of Canada's, if I was Al-Qaeda, I'd be jumping for joy if I heard of any country whom I did not like was being so stupid as to actually have a wireless system control such a critical part of their infrastructure as the electrical power grid. But that's exactly what Canada's doing and the US is doing. Same thing. It's just indefensible. Some of the enemies, like the NASA, North American Space Agency, they have come out and said, like, the world does experience like solar storms cyclically, like every 11 or 12 years. Well, we had one about 11 years ago. And again, this is all on the internet. You can look it up. In the US, they had several states, entire states in the northeastern seaboard were without power because of a solar storm. And it lasted for many weeks, I think several months. It cost the American government like billions of dollars. There were many lives lost. I don't know how many. This is 11 years ago. And NASA is predicting a severe solar storm is about to hit us. It could even, according to them, it could even be 2012, but it will be before 2014. And if we ever go wireless in our electric grid, it'll fry the electronics inside a smart meter. Anything that is electronics inside it. Solar flares are similar, but just to a lesser degree. Even severe lightning storms can knock out whole cities or whole regions of a country. ECM is electronic countermeasure, which is the stuff I used to do, or jamming, radio. Jamming is World War II technology, but it's still relevant. If I was a disgruntled meter reader, and if I was upset with Fortis BC and I was so inclined, I could get a transmitter, literally. And we know it's 910 megahertz. I can get a transmitter, tune to that frequency. I can just knock out a substation. I would knock everybody's power out. If there was a home I didn't like, somebody in that home, I can come to that home, I can zap their meter. I'll screw up their doggone bills because of what I would do with their meter. Plus, I'd knock all their power out. If I was Al-Qaeda, you know what they were alleged to have done, like in 9/11? I mean, they would turn over in their grave laughing at this opportunity to create such havoc to their worst enemy, like the US of A. Organized crime. I mean, and what I said to the Prime Minister in particular is like, you got to, and I said, you must divorce Industry Canada from industry. And I mentioned Bernard Lord, like you've got to separate them from him so that they can, and I said, encourage them to talk to the Directorate of Electronic Warfare, which is the office in which I worked. No electronic warfare in the world, any army, Chinese, Russian, Italian, or Canadian, would ever condone or recommend a wireless system. But that's what we're doing, because industry is somehow separated, military pushed them away so they're not being listened to, and they have the ear of government, and the money is just too doggone great. If you even look in Health Canada, we have actually gone to them and challenged, like, what are these studies you keep alluding to that are telling, enabling you to keep on telling us how safe it is? And they've alluded to, say, independent science study. So they sent us the studies. When you look at it, there was the University of Ottawa, the research facility near the University of Ottawa. When you look behind the lines, who funded that study? Who funded that facility? CWTA, Bernard Lord and his group. They named a certain scientist in particular who was the author of this particular study. When you look behind the lines there, who funded that particular study that he did? CWTA, Bernard Lord. Just track the money. Electronic warfare weapons. Even Iran has had electromagnetic pulse weapons. They got them within this past year. India has the knowledge, they don't yet have the hardware. Pakistan has the knowledge, they don't yet have the hardware. I think New Zealand has the hardware. The major countries certainly do. HARP is the world's most powerful transmitter. It's been around for 22 years. Located in Alaska. High frequency, it stands for High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program. The world's most powerful transmitter, billions of watts, which they can focus like a laser beam up to the ionosphere, which will deflect down at whatever angle they want to hit, whatever country they want. If they want, they can literally incinerate the entire agricultural belt of the Ukraine. If they want, they can turn that electronically, bless you, electronically to any country they want, and they can literally incinerate anything they wish. Any electric grid would just fry. I mean, they would literally fry. No exaggeration, fry. And malware, we're all aware of Stuxnet, the malware that it's now known, I think, or at least it's generally accepted, that the US government and the Israeli government collaborated and they developed this virus called Stuxnet, which they deliberately attacked the Iranian nuclear development program, and they set it back at least a couple of years until it was uncovered. And then they came out with Flame, which is like an even more advanced one, and that is still percolating in the same kind of community. And then they have a third one, Ulru or something or other, and that's one that is terrifying. It'll capture your computer. It'll capture, like every computer has like a kind of a camera inside it. It can enable them to look around your room. I'm serious. Have a look on the internet. Well, if you look up malware, which will give you Stuxnet, S-T-U-X-N-E-T, and Flame, F-L-A-M-E, I'm sure it'll give you the other one as well, I want to say U-L-R-U, but it's something like 4 letters. But it's even more aggressive, and it'll take command of your computer, like anybody's computer. So that's where we are. Here's all the references I've given. Everything I've said pretty much is there. When you leave here, I hope the heck I've upset you. No, but I'm serious, because if I haven't, then I failed. But, and I come back, like I'm 77, I'm supposed to be home retired. I'm supposed to be like taking life easy, but and I used to think my government looked after me, and I used to think that I could, but I've come to realize that I'm not. and neither are you. And it's terrible what's happening, and it's worse what's going to happen to your children and your children's children. When you look at the rate of autism, and you look at like Alzheimer's and dementia, I mean, the curve is just exponential. It is literally exponential with the growth of this stuff, but we're not being protected, and that is not right. We have to stand up. I've never been an activist in my life, not ever, until this issue. And I simply could not. My wife has asked me many times, are you sure you want to do this? I said, no, I don't want to do it, but like, I think I have to do it. And that's why I'm here. So that's it, folks. Thank you.
We're going to start the question and answer period now, in about a minute from now. So for those of you that have a question you'd like to ask Jerry, he's happy to answer. We have a microphone just down here by the stage, so you can start making your way down there. I got a message from some of our tireless volunteers at the tables out there. For those of you that have purchased one of the information packets, which I encourage all of you to do so, the more education you have, the more resources you have, the better informed you are, the more confident you will feel as you share this information with others. And by the way, photocopy that stuff. Photocopy it. Give it to your coworkers, your families, your neighbors. Photocopy it. Ask them to photocopy it. It's there to be shared, to make people aware.